Yeah, come grab a sheet. Hey, Elizabeth, can I get you to help me pass these out? 'Cause I'm gonna be up here.
Chad, there you go. Thank you.
Hey, Chris, can you do like a super quick sound check from where you're at?
Sure, of course.
Yeah, help me pass these out. I'm gonna be up here. No.
Right in. Okay, so thank you all for having me here today. It's really.
Hey, Chris,
An
can you do
honor.
like a super quick sound check from where you're at?
Sure, of course.
It sounds good. It sounds real good.
Okay.
All right. So we're just gonna wait just a little bit. We're running on Harold Washington time. Yeah, I get it. I did that. Wait, do I need to have this on? Make sure not to make any weird noises. I don't know why the background looks so weird like that. Oh, well. I love you. How's everybody doing? I know I asked earlier. How you doing? You doing okay, Mijo? Yeah, I met my student. I know you're doing great. Yeah. Yeah, you good. Welcome, Kelvin. Come on in. I'm gonna take roll super quick, and my amazing sister Elizabeth is sending out a little bit of a write-up on May Day. And please, I know you're all working on your papers, pay attention. Look at the speaker, not at your computer screens. Hello, come on in.
Welcome.
Kelvin is here, and Alejandro's not here, Joel, Tamia, Isaiah, wow, this is terrible. Brenda is here. Armando is here. That's it. Oh, Miha. Miha, what's your last name? Did I get it right? What is that? That is your phone that needs to come off. Please.
Yeah, if you want to, yeah.
I have one of my legendary migraines today, which makes me really, Jasmine, Jesus. That took forever. I'm like, where's your name? Okay, I think I got everybody. All right, welcome everybody. Today we have the honor of having Chris Mahan, and I call him the people's historian. I've known Chris. Damn, I've known Chris since before 2004. I've known Chris since like 2000. When was 9/11?
2001. So I think it was right before that we met. Yes.
Wow,
Yeah.
so I met Chris
Yes.
at a here in Chicago, and I was coming to do anti-poverty work, and he was one of the most welcoming people I've ever met. But the other thing he did is that he gave me a tour of Chicago, which was just brilliant. So he's here to talk about May Day. And really how it ties into today's student activism. And so let's give him a huge round of applause.
Thank you very much. So just a little housekeeping thing. I want to make sure there's plenty of time for discussion. So when would be, I'm looking at that clock, when would be like,
Let's set the timer. What do you want? 15 minutes?
yeah, 15 minutes.
Set a
Oh, so
timer for 15 minutes.
there's at least 15 minutes for discussion.
Yeah, and if we,
15 minutes,
if we-
down.
if we
Okay.
dig it, if we like the discussion, we can keep going beyond that. Did you take, oh, you didn't take the day
Yeah,
off.
I took the day off.
Oh, my
I
God.
absolutely did take the day.
All
off.
right,
Good.
beautiful. Go
Okay.
ahead.
All right, thank you. So first of all, I want to say thank you to Jesus, to Professor Estrada, and to Harold Washington College for inviting me to speak here today about the subject of May Day and its meaning for students today. Actually, one of the things that I remembered in the course of researching for today is that it's very, very important that, and very appropriate that we have a discussion like this at Harold Washington College, because Harold Washington himself was one of the people who fought to get May Day remembered in this city. When he was mayor on the occasion of the centennial of the events at Haymarket Square. He was mayor in 1986, so that was, of course, 100 years after, and he made sure that year, and I remember it very distinctly, that there were commemorations, and they were the first commemorations in a long time, official commemorations in Chicago. So it's entirely appropriate that we are here at Harold Washington College. what I'd like to do today is just talk a little about what happened to create the internationally known holiday of May Day, a holiday that began just a few blocks from here, but yet for years was totally blacklisted in this country, ignored in this country, deliberately not celebrated in this country. You know, what happened to create May Day as an international holiday, and then just maybe throw out some thoughts, but I really want to hear your thoughts about what is the meaning of May Day for students today. So the first thing to understand about May Day is it begins in 1886, which is 21 years exactly after the American Civil War. The American Civil War is over, and you have, as a result of that, this explosion of industry and an explosion of division between rich and poor in the country. Chicago at that time in 1886 is the fastest growing city in the entire world. There are immigrants that are flooding into the city from all over, particularly all over the world, particularly Europe, but all over the world. You have this intense division between rich and poor in the city. You also have a situation where there are nothing to alleviate poverty. This is time, there's no Social Security, there's no unemployment compensation, there's no workers' comp, there's nothing. So if you're poor, if you're out of work, you are out of luck. As a result of that, all over the United States, there's an intense strike wave that begins in 1886 to fight for the 8-hour day. On Michigan Avenue, there's a huge demonstration on May 1st, and is led by some key labor leaders, very militant labor leaders. A few days later, there's a strike south of here in the area between Pilsen and Bridgeport, what was called the McCormick Reaper plant. There's a strike and several workers are killed. So the leaders of the labor movement at that time called for a rally to protest that police killing. I mean, obviously, killings by the police is still a major issue in Chicago, but they call this public rally to condemn police brutality. It's held at a place called Haymarket Square, which is right over Randolph and Des Plaines, just a few blocks west of here. And I would urge you at some point to go there and to see the monuments that we finally forced the city to, after years and years of campaigning, force the city finally to put a monument to what happened at Haymarket Square. So there's this rally that's called on the night of May 4th. It's very hastily organized on one day's notice. It starts late. It's rainy. The speakers go on too long. By later in the evening, a rally that they hoped to get 20,000 people at, but they only got originally 2,000 people at. It had dwindled to 200 people. The speakers are droning on. One of the speakers makes a kind of a tactical mistake and says, these words, people are philosophically anarchists, we must strangle the law. That's used as an excuse. He's speaking metaphorically, symbolically. That's used as an excuse for 176 cops to march down the street, march north, and with Winchester rifles, and order the rally to stop, to disperse. The person on the stage says, who's an English immigrant, one of the leaders, Samuel Fielding, says, "But officer, we are peaceable." At that point, from inside the crowd, someone throws a bomb. It arches through the air, it lands in front of the police officers, it explodes. It kills one police officer immediately. All hell breaks out at this point. The police proceed to then start shooting wildly. They kill all sorts of people. People are dragged to the police station a little south of Haymarket Square. They're bleeding on the floors of the police station. And then there is a wave of hysteria against union organizers, against particularly immigrant workers, against workers who speak German. They break into trade union halls. They break into German athletic societies, and anybody who has, if you can recall the the hysteria after 9/11 or after Pearl Harbor, what happened with Japanese Americans. Anybody is suspect. They then hunt down some of the key leaders of the union movement and the revolutionary labor movement in Chicago and arrest them. 8 people go to trial. Of those, or 8 people are accused and are about to stand trial. 7 of them were born or raised in Germany and are German immigrant workers. One is a guy by the name of Albert Parsons, who was from Texas, and he manages to escape. There's this at first. There's this gigantic campaign of hysteria by right-wing media, anti-union media, the Chicago Tribune. It's kind of, at that time, was kind of like Fox TV today. As the trial begins, Albert Parsons, who managed in the turmoil to get away and is safely in Wisconsin, makes the decision that he can't, in good conscience, let these 7 immigrant workers stand alone. Albert Parsons comes back to Chicago on the first day of the trial. During the jury selection, he walks into the courtroom and says, "Your Honor, I've come to stand trial with my innocent comrades." They go to trial. The trial is a travesty. The jurors are all selected mainly from Marshall Fields, who was one of the guys who wanted them to hang. So you have a biased jury, you have a biased judge. This judge is like, this trial becomes like the hot ticket for society folks, rich folks, to come and entertain themselves by watching the trial. During the trial, the judge is like, he has beautiful young society women sitting next to him in the judge's post, and he's exchanging little flirty notes with them during the trial while these men are fighting for their lives. I mean, it was just obscene what happened. But ultimately, despite the efforts of a very, very principled, they were not revolutionaries, but they were principled lawyers to defend these men, they are all convicted. 7 of them are sentenced to die, 1 is sentenced to hard labor. And everybody thinks the whole thing's over at that point. But they didn't count on one person in particular, extraordinary individual by the name of Lucy Parsons, who was married to Albert Parsons. Now, Lucy Parsons, if you don't do anything else, read about Lucy Parsons, because she's just an extraordinary figure. This is a woman of color who she described herself as being of Mexican descent, but if she was clearly Afro-Mexicana. And part of that may have been that she was married to a white man in Texas, where it was illegal for Blacks and whites to be married at that point. But she and Albert Parsons are probably the key leaders of the union movement, the revolutionary union movement at that time. And this woman decides, ain't nobody killing my husband and my comrades without a fight. She goes on a speaking tour. She speaks to over 200,000 people in 16 states over that next year. Wow. In the year while all the appeals are being being processed. Despite her efforts, there is a change in public sentiment. Originally, people were very hostile to the defendants. But as the truth comes out, because one of the things to understand about this is that of these 8 men who are accused of murder, and the legal theory on which that accusation is made is that because they advocated revolutionary violence, as a political abstraction, because they said under certain circumstances, working people have the right to use violence against their oppressors, therefore they're responsible for the bomb that was thrown at Haymarket. But of those 8 people, one of them was there was a speaker's platform, it was a wagon. One of them was on the wagon. The guy who was on the wagon who said, "But officers, we are peaceable," they're accusing him of committing murder. He couldn't possibly have thrown the bomb. Other people, Albert Parsons had left the rally and was up the street having a drink at a bar. He couldn't have committed the murder. He couldn't have thrown the bomb. one person wasn't even at the rally at all.
Wow.
And as this information came out, public opinion began to change, and there became more and more a sentiment that the defendants should at least be pardoned, if not exonerated completely. Unfortunately, that there isn't enough of that sentiment. And in November of 1887, 4 of the defendants are hanged. 3 of them are committed to 2 of them have their sentences commuted to life imprisonment. 1 is sentenced to 15 years at hard labor. Later, what happens is that a progressive governor of the state of Illinois, John Peter Altgeld, reviews the entire case and rules that and pardons posthumously everyone. He pardons the living convicted leaders who are still in prison, lets them out of prison, and those who were hanged, he posthumously exonerates. Out of all this, on July 14th, 1889, and the key thing about that date is that it's the 100th anniversary of the storming of the Bastille prison. There's an International Labor Congress in Paris, commemorate the Bastille, and a motion is made by a representative of the American Federation of Labor to make May Day, May 1st, May Day, International Labor Day. It passes, and ever since, in virtually every other country on earth, May 1st is Labor Day, but not here in the United States because its origins are too radical. During all of the years of the Cold War, for instance, May Day was characterized as being a Russian Soviet holiday. People refused to celebrate it. There were no official celebrations of it in the United States. But it was only really with the resurgence of the working class movement in this country in this century that we've really seen May Day been restored to its rights in the United States. And I had the privilege of working with one of the unions that fought to make sure that on May 1st, 2006, we had a gigantic demonstration in Grant Park, overwhelmingly of immigrant workers, where if you ever want to have a good day, be on the stage at a rally in Grant Park and hear one of your co-workers read the words, "Today is a great day. The workers of Chicago have restored May Day, have brought back May Day to the city in which it was born." Those were words that I had the privilege of writing for one of the leaders of the Garment Workers Union. And then look out and see 750,000 workers.
Yeah.
I think that today, the question is, what does May Day mean today? A lot of people see different aspects of May 1st. They see it as either being like, it's about the unions, it's about the fight for the 8-hour day. Some people see only the ideological side. They see these guys were anarchists. I want to be an anarchist. I want to read about anarchism. In many ways, they were more syndicalists than anarchists, but I think rather than looking at their specific views about ideological politics, to me, the thing that stands out most about May 1st and the leaders, the revolutionary leaders of that movement was their internationalism. June 21st, 1886, to me, that's one of the days that should be remembered in history, because that's the day that Albert Parsons refused to stab on the immigrant workers, and he came back and he ultimately paid with his life. He was one of those who was hanged. And that's the thing about May Day, is that May Day is celebrated all over the world by people of all colors, of all genders, in all countries. It's the one holiday like that. And so what does that mean for us today? And I think that obviously the question today is you look at the poverty in this country today, you look at the crisis in Gaza, what do students do? I can only tell you that the way I first learned about May Day was in May of 1970, and I'm dating myself here. I was a teenager in living in Washington, D.C. in the anti-war movement. I went to a demonstration in New Haven, Connecticut to demand the freedom of Bobby Seale and the other Black Panther Party political prisoners who were on trial for their lives then. At the end of that weekend, we observed May Day at the beginning of the weekend. At the end of the weekend, the United States announced it was invading Cambodia. And I was on the New Haven Green that Sunday when there was a motion that was put forward for a nationwide student strike against the invasion of Cambodia. And it passed. I distinctly remember raising my hand to vote in favor of that motion. A few days later, some of the students who carried out that motion at Kent State University were shot dead. A few days ago, I received a communication from people at Kent State where they announced their support for the encampments around Gaza and their opposition to the National Guard. You know, the Speaker of the House of Representatives of the United States has called for the National Guard to be used against these student protests. Well, I've actually been and spoken at Kent State University twice, and I've seen what bringing the National Guard to a campus means. So I think for all of us today, you know, being a student is about questioning, it's about learning. We all need to think very sharply about what we can do now to carry on this tradition of May Day. And with that, I would very much like to take questions or hear other people's thoughts and their perspective
Excellent.
on what May Day means. Thank you very much.
Just FYI, you were at like 18 minutes, but I didn't put the timer, but it's beautiful. Very
Thank
good.
you. Thank you.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Well, thank you.
Well, what do you think about the National Guard being called in, if they get called in? We're already seeing the police arrest hundreds of students.
Sounds a bit unnecessary.
It's excessive.
Yeah.
That's all the love we get. I have a student who is in the National Guard, so I'm not gonna call him out. He's not now here. But the National Guard isn't coming to police. The National Guard will shoot on sight if they're commanded to, and they don't care who they're shooting. And I don't think people understand this. This should be like a last resort when there's like a mob or a riot. And there's no rioting happening at these students' encampments. To me, there's no reason to call the National Guard. Go ahead.
I think it's just, at least for me, like it was hurtful, because I know there was like a video circling around, just like seeing like fully guarded officers trying to push past, like, in a sense, was like just a barricade of people just trying to get like at students who are just like peacefully praying. Like, it baffles me in a sense that a lot of people are okay with that and are trying to justify that, let alone the police themselves trying to justify it. It's like, students are peacefully, like, in a sense, protesting on their campus. They're still willing to find ways to still get an education, whether that be like online or through other like different mediums. And yet it shocks me that like schools themselves, or at least like universities themselves, like just their own response to like their own students' actions, instead of backing them up, their own response is, well, we're gonna remove privileges that you have on our campus because we just can't let this slide. But at the same time, it also falls onto the aspect, at least in my eyes, of just like, okay, then where do you support your kids then? Like, under what lines do you end up at the end of the day, end up supporting your kids? Because either you do or you don't, and just you removing privileges like being like in their dorm rooms, or like having like food vouchers, or even like
Email access.
email access, or even like in that aspect of like doing peaceful protests. Like, it is ridiculous to see grown adults having to push people, shove people, and arresting students just by mutually agreeing that what's happening in Gaza is just not okay. None of the things that are happening are okay, and we're standing in a very respectful solidarity with them, and we're showing them respect in any way, shape, or form we can, even if we're not, in a sense, Palestinian by blood, or like, you know, religious in nature alongside them. I think it's just common human nature that, hey, if somebody's suffering, kind of have a mutual agreement of like, yeah, what's happening to you is very terrible, and I'm sincerely sorry. And even though I can't do much on my own behalf, I will stand and support you. But it's baffling to see that immediately the moment people see that, their first instinct is, oh, let me call the cops on actual students. Because we just don't agree with it.
Yeah, yeah. And I was telling somebody, because I've been organizing since I was 19, that's like 33 years. And I've taken over presidents' offices, buildings. You know, I organized a huge march in a very conservative town against the war in Iraq, and we got it from the cops. But I've not ever seen this kind of repression to this level. You know, expelling students, suspending students, arresting faculty. I don't know if you saw the video of the
Yeah.
one saying, hey, I'm faculty, and this cop grabbed her and slammed her on the ground, and it's like, doesn't matter if you're a professor or not, they don't give a damn, they wanna shut this down. You know, and so I don't know if we can maybe speak to why are they so angry now? Why is not just the administration, but the police, the government? It's not just Trump saying we gotta shut this down, right? He's a violent, vile person. But it's not just the Republicans, the GOP, they want to shut down now, you know? Other questions? That was beautifully said. Thank you so much, Xander.
So, I just listened to a podcast actually on the way to school, and it was talking about how, the same comparison you're making, what happened, in the sixties and seventies in the anti-war movement on college campuses and what's happening now with anti-war in Palestine. And it was kind of pointing out that the kind of mythos, which happens a lot in kind of historic remembering, has changed it to, yeah, the National Guard came and there was like the bad guys, but they forget about how there was also the same level of kind of disagreement with the kids who were on campus at the rallies and stuff. And there were anti-protesters just like there are now, and the sentiment of most Americans was with the National Guard. And then they were talking about how this has, and it's not like nothing happened between then and now. In the 80s, there was like rallies with South Africa apartheid
Yeah.
stuff. And it was again the same thing where there was a lot of negative sentiment among most people. And I guess the repetitiveness of this kind of makes me wonder what you think. Like, it feels like we're not moving very much because it seems very repetitive. Like every time there's an anti-war movement and college campuses are like, these kids are showing up and saying this isn't fair. It feels like American sentiment in that moment is still with the National Guard, if you will. And then it's only in like this like historic memory that it's like, oh no, that's not how it was. Do you understand?
Yeah.
I think so. And it's a very good question about the whole question of the sanitizing of the past, really.
Yeah,
And on the question, for instance, of the National Guard at Kent State, having actually been to Kent twice, I mean, one of the things that's interesting is that there was, at the time, a lot of the townspeople were in favor of the National Guard shooting those students, even though they were their own neighbors, in some cases, even their children. And there's been a sanitizing of what happened during the Vietnam War, like, for instance, with the way Martin Luther King is described. It's always like, well, he opposed the Vietnam War, and you'd think that that was a non-controversial position or something. There was fury at Martin Luther King for opposing the Vietnam War, including within the civil rights movement. I mean, civil rights leaders like Roy Wilkins of the NAACP and others were just, they thought he should leave that alone, just like there's some people who will say today you should, you know, it's a divisive issue, Gaza, Israel, we don't want to talk about that. There was the same kind of thing.
And they're in my union, believe it or not. Educated people, right, that refuse to pass a ceasefire statement. It's disgusting. It really is. Sorry.
No, it's okay. So you see, I mean, one of the things, even with Haymarket, Haymarket's gotten sanitized. I mean, tomorrow there's going to be a ceremony at the wagon that was finally put up by the city. And there's gonna be some unions, they're gonna put, every year there's unions that put up a plaque from around the world. But there are forces that have reduced Haymarket to being just the fight for the 8-hour day or union rights. Now obviously we want the 8-hour day and we want union rights, but to reduce what happened solely to that, to not talk about the frame up, the police brutality, and also not to talk about the revolutionary character of these labor leaders. I mean, they were for the abolition of the capitalist system. And that, and a lot of the material that unions put out, the more conservative unions, that's never mentioned. So you do have a situation where history gets sanitized. I think part of our job as thinking people, as students and teachers and people who've written about labor history, such as myself, is to point out the full nuances of what happened and not let it be sanitized.
Do you think that the sanitizing of history is maybe leads to this repetitiveness? Because it feels
Yeah.
like it's a lot of people that, since we brought up Martin Luther King, a lot of people that I knew during Black Lives Matter movement, were people who very much were like into Martin Luther King and like talked about being on the right side of history, but it feels like when the history comes, they are not. And sometimes it feels like maybe it's because we sanitize these figures from the past into not being radical.
Mm.
And so it's
Absolutely right,
easier.
absolutely right. Very
And so
good
when
point.
radical stuff happens in our day that is very similar to things that happened in the past that our heroes were part of,
Right.
we're like, oh no, but that's different. And this is bad
Yeah,
because it's
Right.
extreme.
that's right.
Well, here's an example of that I think that's an excellent point. Martin Luther King was assassinated on April 4th, 1968. On April 4th, 1967, he gave a speech at Riverside Church in New York called "A Time to Break Silence." And it was and that was his formal, public disagreeing with US policy in Vietnam and calling for one of the things that he called for a ceasefire in Vietnam. And yet there's people that are going to have Martin Luther King celebrations. Martin Luther King celebrations this year, and they never asked the question like, well, if he was for a ceasefire in Vietnam, don't you think he would be for a ceasefire in Gaza today? But that doesn't get mentioned. Here, I'll give you a very personal example of this, that I went to Kent State University. I was invited to speak at Kent State University because one of the things I did was I helped lead a walkout of high school students after the killings at Kent State. After I came back from New Haven, I helped lead this walkout. I was going to school in Washington, D.C. It was the only high school in the capital city of the United States that went out in protest of the killings at Kent State. So they invited me to speak at Kent State. It was right at the time that the Iraq War was about to begin. And the students wanted to talk about the Iraq War in addition to talking about this 30-year-old event of students being killed at Kent State. And there were some professors and some people in what's called this Kent State Memorial Committee who only wanted to talk about what had happened in the past. They did not want to bring up Iraq that was just about that was taking place. And they asked me, well, what do you think? And I said, what do you think the people who were killed would want to do? Do you think they would just want us to turn them into some like plaster saints or, have some, live in the past? Don't you think they would want us to oppose the war that's going on right now?
Did you get booed off the stage by the other speakers?
No.
You've always had courage, man. I gotta give it to you. He was 14 years old back then. Think about it. That's the same age as 17, my bad. 17, okay. Still commendable.
Chris,
Elizabeth.
I just had a question, and maybe it's a question to the class, is basically where do you get your news, or where do you get your stories? Because I think most of you here were in Chicago during the Black Lives Matter marches. And if you read some of the mainstream news, whenever that time is referred to, it's not, you know, the Black Lives Matter uprising or it's always the riots.
Yeah.
Black Lives Matter riots. Now, how many of you remember a riot that summer during the pandemic? You know, and yet that's how it's promoted.
I mean, there's a lot of riots that do all this.
And what does it, you know, you're talking about looting or, you know, Chris was working at Macy's. And that, you know, there was looting, there was, you know, crash and smash and grab looting
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
But we're talking about the people doing the marches, if you were there. People are telling you what you experienced was different from what you remember.
Yeah.
How does that make you feel? When it doesn't match your own experience of what you just experienced.
I mean, the way I see it is just that people really just took advantage of the Black Lives Matter movement in terms of like for example, so there's a Walgreens by my house. It's like the local pharmacy, right? It got burned down during the Black Lives Matter movements. And it was just like, for really no reason, like someone just threw a Molotov at it and burned the whole building down. And it was just like my experiences with it was like not even related to Black Lives Matter,
Right.
just somebody,
Right.
I guess you could say it's some type of like, yeah.
How did you make it separate as two separate things? How did you sort it out your own? That it was two separate things.
It's so long. Like,
Because it was, Walgreens were closing next door.
yeah, I mean, yeah.
I think too, like, I was shocked. I don't know why I was shocked. I go to Mariano's, that's not even close to downtown, it's close to Chinatown. And it got boarded up. Cause somebody smashed the window. But my thing is, you know, if these people that were looting and grabbing, they were grabbing food, diapers, and I don't wanna justify that, but. Maybe they needed, you know, they needed the stuff and, you know, they saw it readily available, you know what I mean? But to characterize a whole Black Lives Matter movement as a riot is BS. It's not the first time this happened. Every time, especially when you see black and brown people gathering together, the way the news represents it as violent, a riot. I mean, they're doing it now. Not the first thing I heard from a colleague was, well, I don't support the Cornell students being pro-Hamas. Where did that lie come from? Who in the right mind would say they're pro-Hamas when they're peacefully protesting genocide?
Yeah.
You'd have to be an idiot to say that out loud, right? And yet, this is a narrative that people remember. It was the president of the college who went and testified and lied, you know, but most of the protests have been peaceful, you know? I'm sorry, go ahead, Sandra.
No, it's just like I guess like when it came down to like that, right? Like it baffles me because like I guess like what I think about is like I think people like that's the thing that like, infuriates me more here about like the states or I guess like individuals in general. Like we're such hypocrites only like when it comes into like pure convenience because like it hurts me in the sense to think that especially when it came down to like the Black Lives Matter movement and like any movement like in general, it's just like it baffles me that like in a moment when truly like there's supposed to be like voices speaking out about like an issue and there's supposed to be like, you know, some sort of like beneficial way of like voicing out concerns or issues, then there's like those like background individuals that end up just causing more havoc that in the news immediately it just paints like, oh, these are dangerous people, like these are people like doing like the worst of the worst, like be like make sure to like be safe out there. Like I remember like there was so much like at least on the news that it concerned me that like the only thing that you were seeing in a sense were like these background individuals that were causing most of like what was like property damage, or people like snagging stuff that were like stealing stuff, and they were just painting it as just like, oh, like so-called criminal like, you know, goes on to like steal stuff, or like local individual was caught like, you know, breaking into like a building and just like snagging things. But yet immediately it also gets tied into, oh, it was somebody involved in the protest. It was somebody involved like in that movement. And it's like, no, I think people should be able, especially like as a news outlet, you should be able to have a specific, I guess, like, I wouldn't say general because again, at the end of the day, you take your own side as to where you want to stand in it. But at the same time, I think it would be smart, or at least like it would be logical enough that if you're gonna interview something, especially like a movement or like a protest or something that is like genuinely like peaceful, you should learn how to differentiate what is, okay, this is the group of people that are genuinely advocating, voicing, and speaking about concerns. And these are individuals that sadly, at this point, at the end of the day, on the day-to-day basis, are just going to be doing dumb shit and are using like rallies or like moments to speak about concerns to just go out and do crime. It's the same thing, like, for example, like during like 4th of July, good old, like, you know, like American independence, like all that stuff, and then people use the advantage that because of like firework noises, they go out and do crime because people can differentiate what is gunshots to fireworks. It's kind of like similar, but of course not at the same time, because it just breaks my heart to think that there are people out here kind of just like voicing their stuff, like doing what they have to do to get a point across. And then you have the stragglers out there that are just doing way over the top things that are not necessary to just voice out what is a concern, but sadly, it's a mix.
Well, yeah, when people take advantage of stuff like that, it's like gives the media and the outlets better leverage on to twist the narrative, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like you'll see these lootings, the people who don't have any part in like the movement, and they're just doing it just to do, like I said, dumb shit. That would just give the media a better twist on things, just makes things look so much worse, like I've been working at Target, I'm a manager at Target, and we got hit during the lootings, and it was just like it had nothing to do with the movement, if I personally believe so. Like people were selling video games, people were breaking glass, stealing stuff that they didn't need, and you'll see the diapers and stuff like that untouched, and it's like people are just taking advantage of the movements for their own personal benefit, and that's giving the media leverage on how to make things look actually worse than they are. It's kind of sad. So I genuinely agree with you.
Yeah, because it's sad that like to say that like the news outlet at this point is just like wildfire to like anything that is just in general like a dumb action. It's like they should be using like their power like as in a sense like a wide in a sense platform to voice out or like spur out information. You would think that like most like media platforms, like for example like Fox News would actually like, you know, use a platform to actually spread about something, but then it's like this whole entire like biased like circumstance of like we will only post things that we know will pass attention and
Exactly.
especially like will cause mayhem, where you're going to immediately have a straight up like from the get-go, the moment you finish hearing the story, you're gonna have a 50 divide. Like at the end of the day, you still fall on the lines of like, where do you fall? Yes or no?
I agree. I think the media, as it's run out, it's very corporatized. If you see one news story, you probably see them all over the place. And I read very widely in the mornings, but I also hit up a lot of international news because it's so biased, you know? But what do you think? I think this ties into this whole, you know, they did the $95 billion aid to Taiwan, Israel, and Ukraine, right? Which I wrote a piece about this, but one of the things that was included in that was that TikTok has to sell its company. And why? Why is that, right? To me, TikTok, you know, Instagram, these social media platforms are one of the ways that I'm getting informed.
Yeah.
I connected with protesters in Evanston. I hit them up and I'm like, hey, what do you need? And they're like, well, we need tarps. You know, we need people to come out. We love coffee and donuts. Turned out it was an hour away, so I sent money. But my point is like social media is such a wonderful way to be informed, to talk to people, to know what's happening at Cornell, like live, to see how peaceful the protests are. You know, even that video I showed you from YouTube of people just being arrested by the busloads, I wouldn't have been able to see that had somebody not streamed it, because the news wasn't covering it, right?
Yep.
Or they'll cover the one Jewish student that feels, you know, what's the word I'm looking for, unsafe because of an encampment. I'm like, what the hell is that? That's not even balanced, you know? I hate this idea that we're living in a post-truth world. And people say it like it's no big deal, but that is a big deal, you know? Go ahead.
Also, there's so much information gathered. If you think about like the Mueller report and the impeachment system, all this detail and all this legal information, how much is costing all of, you know, the litigation going on right now and piles of paper. But it doesn't matter that, you know, little bits of that may connect it and say, okay, TikTok, for example, it's a way for China to spy on Americans. But nobody ever connects it to the fact that Chinese investment in American corporations and loans to American corporations, if they had to call in all the Chinese loans to American corporation, the American economy would tank.
Hmm.
And if all of those investors and investments and corporate interests interlocking did not have access to a tremendous amount of information about the workings of the corporations, the mechanisms of cybersecurity and so forth, it doesn't take a tank in, attacking Washington DC. They could just bring down the cyber networks that run the banking system in the United States, or the hospitals, or whatever. And yet, we get this red herring about
Mhm.
Kingsborough
Right.
being, gonna invade our security. Our security's already. We've already got, Facebook, Meta. With, if you look, whenever like some of you don't look at Facebook, but one thing it's good for is you can look at advertising. And it's the advertising libraries, inform yourself, what other ads are going out? And how much of it is political advertising, it's like millions of dollars. And that's where, the Mueller reports reporting, well, yes, there is Chinese bots, there's Russian bots, there's so much input in how that messaging is happening.
But that's also in doing them, Elizabeth. I was talking about this with Patrick, who's a comrade of ours, and the way I get a lot of posts on LinkedIn of all places of people dying, of dead bodies, of people suffering in Palestine. I never would have thought LinkedIn would have been politicized like that, but it's given me the information I want, so I'm learning more. So then I learn about this British journalist who's been murdered, and his son. And so in some ways, the very drive to collect data and to give people what they search for is giving me what I want to search for. You know what I mean? And I'm good. Keep it up. I want to see these protests, I want to see what's happening in other parts of the world.
The CDO platform now,
What?
the CDO, the CET.
I haven't seen that.
Yeah, it was disaffected CNN broadcaster that started a new platform because, even in Gaza, if you have 80 journalists being murdered and, information being blocked, there's a question of how are we getting this information? Is it purely, used to have Indymedia.com.
Right.
Where you had citizen people doing information. But it's a question, how do we sift through it? How do we kind of have a way for ourselves to look at what we're seeing and say, this doesn't add up, this doesn't make sense. I've got this bit of information over here and this bit of information. That's what annotated reality is. And so what are you saying? What did I just read? How am I going to use it to make my argument?
Yep, that's
What do I think about this source?
right.
Maybe I've got a bit of information that's verifiable evidence and I can use it. The argument is shite in this piece. But, the information, like you're saying,
Yeah.
I use a lot if I did now, and I'm in contact with different people who are additionally questioning things.
Yeah.
And saying,
Very
"Hey,
bravely.
what is it about the story that just is not hanging together? What is it? What information do I need to get a better understanding of what I'm asking a question about?"
Yeah. Word.
Yeah. Why is it that we can't study African American AP courses in Florida?
Ugh, in Arizona and you
Why
name
is
it.
it that in Mississippi now they're gonna declare a Confederate legacy month?
A month.
Confederate legacy.
Woo!
month.
But I'm like,
You know, I mean, what's going on here? It's, you know, this is sort of like, it's like the Whitehead. I mean, you know, it's like there's so much crap going through the system that it's bubbling to the top and it's gonna like pop. We're ready to pop the pimple popper, you know, in our surface of our country right now. Yeah, there's a
Yo,
little
Elizabeth's a
thing to
poet,
it, like,
so, you know.
Pops pimples, well, we're going around now, popping a lot of pimples. We're
Jeez,
seeing that
that's
happen. I mean, like there's, you know, this Egyptian comic. What is this? What's so ridiculous about this story?
yeah, that's true. Somebody else,
Makes sense.
thoughts or ideas? Go ahead.
I kind of just wanted to point out, wanted to like ask a question. It says that on here, I guess there's only one cop who died in the Haymarket protest. It was only like 7.
Just on that,
Go ahead.
one cop on the scene. At the moment that the bomb was thrown, one cop was killed instantly. There were some, I think, who died later. But the key thing about what happened in the bombing is that, okay, so this bomb is thrown from it. These cops, 176 cops are
I don't want to interrupt you. I'm like pretty well educated on the Haymarket, like the whole thing that happened. I know it was like a group of anarchists that threw the bomb. It wasn't anyone related to the protest. I was just confused on why it said that.
Oh, so that was a difference. One died instantly and the rest died later, presumably.
But it's also important to note, and again, this goes back to this thing of framing and how things are posed, is that all of the media immediately talked about this one cop and you know, it was like when cops die in Chicago, you know, you learn their whole story and there's great sympathy and there's a dramatic funeral. And what was not publicized in the mainstream media at that time was the fact that after the bomb exploded, that the cops began firing wildly, that they killed a number of people that were clearly innocent. They also, and it's also been pretty clearly established that some of the cops who died subsequently of their wounds were actually shot by friendly fire because the cops just started, and none of that, and then it was only later, you know, months and months later, that a lot of that came out, and that's part of what began to shift public opinion, because when the cops moved up, that was at the action of a very aggressive police commander named Captain Bonfield, and he was not acting under the instructions of the mayor. The mayor had actually left the scene a few moments before and said, well, this is a peaceful rally. Nothing's going to happen here. I'm going home. He got on his horse and proceeded to literally got on his horse. He literally had a horse and he rode away. And then when this guy made the statement, when Samuel Fielden made the statement about you must strangle the law, that became the pretext. Okay, so it's an anarchist rally. So they then move in the cops. And that's what leads to someone, I mean, either someone who's just sick of cops in Chicago and threw this dynamite bomb, or possibly an agent provocateur. And the violence subsequently happens. But in the major media presentation, it's always that the anarchists threw this bomb, this innocent cop got killed, aren't they terrible? And they would not emphasize the fact it was a peaceful rally. They really didn't have the right to break up the rally. And that a lot of the violence was actually caused by the police officers themselves.
Yeah, I'm surprised that you know a lot of this history. We learned something new. Good, go ahead. Dylan.
Under what pretext are they allowed to take such actions? Because if they were already stationed there, then that's already assuming that something could go wrong. So were they under the guise of safety there already? Or for what reason could they have taken this action that would lead to similar occurrences?
Very, very good question. So this, just to paint the scene, there's this rally. The police had people, informers inside the rally. about a block south of where the rally was being held, there was a police station, and there were hundreds of cops in that police station waiting in case something happened. The rally takes place again. It goes on for a couple of hours. I mean, the second speaker, Albert Parsons, was a great guy, but he was long-winded. He spoke for an hour. So a rally that starts with the rally starts an hour late. It's like a sort of one of those Chicago nights in May where it looked like it was about to rain. The number of people dwindles. The mayor comes by to see if there's going to be trouble, decides there isn't going to be trouble. But this guy Bonfield, he wants there to be trouble. He wants to make a name for himself, to promote himself. So the minute somebody says something that can be used as a pretext, one of his informers in the crowd runs back to the police station a block away, tells Bonfield, he orders the cops, 176 cops carrying Winchester rifles, marching double time. They basically force people to march down the middle of the street, force people to the sides of the street. And after most of them have gone up to the speaker's platform, Bonfield orders Samuel Fielding he says, I command you to disperse. And that's when he says, but officer, we are peaceable, meaning this is not a riotous assembly. You can't just read the riot act but he begins to step down from the speaker's platform. It's at that point that the bomb is thrown. So there is, like you look at some of these assemblies, these Gaza encampments, they're doing, what essentially is referred to as colloquially as reading the riot act. They're declaring them to be illegal assemblies, and that's when they move in the cops. It was that same kind of situation, but it wasn't a riotous assembly. And in fact, there were reporters who had, covered the different anarchist rallies, the different labor rallies at that time, who said that compared to other rallies, the rhetoric was milder than at other rallies. I mean, there's a lot of general denunciations of the capitalist system, but there were no explicit calls for violence against any particular person or urging people to do something that day. Now, what they claimed in the trial was that the people on trial who were leaders of the union movement of that time, that they had deliberately planned the thing to be the beginning of that rally was supposed to be the beginning of a revolution in Chicago, that there were going to be and that's why the bomb was thrown, and that the people who are on trial were responsible because they advocated revolution. And in some cases some of them did advocate that people had the right, if you were attacked by the police, you would have the right, just speaking theoretically, you might have the right to throw a dynamite bomb if the police were killing you. And then they published articles to that, some of them to that effect, that therefore they were responsible. They had for the person who threw the bomb, but they've never established ever who threw this bomb. There's a lot of speculation. One guy who fled to Argentina, but no one has ever figured out who it was. And the great majority of the people who were tried, it's absolutely physically impossible for them to have thrown the bomb.
Okay, so the most part thing I'm getting is that it was a difference of the personnel. The officer himself wanted to take the action, and so he took it. Because I'm just trying to distinguish this from their hastily made reaction to these protesters. So what happened on January 6th, where there was a delay in test and the I guess deployment of the National Guard.
That's a great question.
Well,
Because of
the mayor of Washington DC
Yeah.
knew that there was gonna be a lot of people coming into DC. Okay, before January 6th. And called and tried to call in the National Guard, and it was refused. And if you look into some of the accounts of that time, not only there's a statement from the city council questioning why the mayor's request was turned down. What was the layers of the process that led to this decision not to call it in? Also, if you look at some of the stuff coming up with some of the hearing, the different people who called the National Guard, and it was just the governor of Maryland finally asking for the National Guard. I mean, all these people, Nancy Pelosi could ask for whatever, and the requests were said, well, just wait. And there's also a question about whether or not the former president was going to use the Insurrection Act. And there was a delay in the National Guard because the Defense Department was concerned that it would lead to another set of problems and situations. So, you know, again, in sifting out what's the answer to your question, you know, like take a look at some of, you know, kind of like trace it back. And it leaves not just the answer, the yes or no is interesting, but all the other questions it raises. Why not? Why was this stop? What were the various concerns leading to the decisions? And what were just kind of like lizard brain decisions rather than thoughtful, considered decisions?
Yeah, because I was just trying to distinguish whether or not this was a difference in either the person heading the operation, or if it was just a situation where there was an unclear guidance, so like perhaps the protocol for this type of situation was different, or perhaps it was because the protocol itself was vague and either justification or action to take.
There's some really interesting articles out there just asking exactly that question. What
Yeah.
happened? What were the sequences of events? Who held up what at what time?
But I mean, really, you raised a really fundamental question, because it's not people attacking the White House and when do you call the National Guard? You know what I mean? I mean, that would have been a great time to call in the National Guard. And who ultimately made that call to not?
The mayor, the governor of.
Who said no?
Finally, who said, we've got to get the National Guard in there. And all these people in the Defense Department and so forth were saying, and the White House was saying,
Mm.
let it go. It's, you know, let's see what happens.
That's a great way of letting things develop, that being sarcastic. Any other questions? Well, thank you, Chris. That was
Thank you.
amazing. That was brilliant.
Thank you very much.